first it says capitalism is not a timeless phenomenon. It emerges within historical time. So it emerges within historical time. In other words, it is a historical social order. So it is not a timeless phenomenon, meaning it's not, for example, it's not like physics, for example. Its laws are not unchangeable laws. On the contrary, capitalism is something which emerges within time, historical time, and it is historically contingent. But that obviously is not, we shouldn't, so historically contingent, capitalism is historically contingent. That is, it emerges within historical time and evolves as to its forms and types and as to its social formation, state formation, etc. But that doesn't contradict two things, at least, or shouldn't. So if something is historically contingent, that it is not necessary for it to exist, that it emerged within a specific time, and since it came into being, it can also not exist, for example. That's what contingent means. There's no necessity for it to exist. On the other hand, for example, 2 plus 2 seem to have some sort of necessity which is beyond history and time, etc. Although, obviously, there are mathematicians and logicians who would contest that, but generally speaking. So mathematics or arithmetic in that sense is necessary. It can't be otherwise. Capitalism is contingent. It can be otherwise. Like it didn't exist at a certain point, and it won't exist at a certain point. So in that sense, it is not a timeless phenomenon. That's one sense that it is not a timeless phenomenon. Another sense in which it is not a but contingent doesn't mean that it doesn't have any necessity, because there is also a type of necessity which we can call historical necessity. So if something is dominant today, even though it is contingent, so in principle it can be otherwise, but that doesn't mean that we can wish it away. So contingent can be very entrenched depending on how dominant it is and how widespread it is. So capitalism is a contingent system in the sense we described, but that doesn't deny that it doesn't have historical necessity. And this historical necessity is loosened and broken only when it is challenged from outside, or due to outside challenge and inner contradictions and inner problems. It can lose its grip on people's mind. But as long as its grip is strong on people's mind and people's thinking and a society's way of life, it is as good as necessary. Yeah, so that's one thing I want to say. And the fact that people start talking about end of capitalism, that can be just a rhetoric, not very genuine. But if it is genuine, that must stem from the fact that, at least for them, capitalism has, at least on them, capitalism has lost its grip. So for them, it is not necessary in the same way as it might be for other people. Okay. Now, the second thing I want to say was just to say that just because capitalism is not a timeless phenomenon, which is correct, and just because capitalism has evolved and it has taken many forms, because it's a historically contingent and evolving system, horizontally as well as vertically. There are different types of capitalism, etc. But that doesn't mean that we can't come up with an ideal type. The ideal type would be a timeless phenomenon. So, but we are not saying that that ideal type actually exists anywhere. And obviously that ideal type of capitalism would be different from actually existing capitalism. So then what's the point of coming up with ideal? The point is that it helps us to understand inner logic capitalism, which is timeless in the sense that inner logic of capitalism means if capitalist rationality, according to the ideal type, actually existed, it would exist in this and that way. And the fact that it doesn't exist in this and that way, that means that capitalism has not fully realized itself. Without buying into all Hegelianism, which might seem to be embedded in this, so that we construct ideal types in order to understand what Streeck has called inherent tendencies of something like actually existing capitalism. So these are two important things, I think. So it is a historically contingent order. It is a historically evolving system. But that doesn't mean that historically contingent, there can't be a historically contingent concept, can't have historical necessity. And secondly, historically contingent and evolving system doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at ideal types and its inherent tendencies. Because if we can understand the ideal type and through it the inherent tendency that is the inner logic of capitalism, so despite the fact that it has evolved, it has manifested itself in many forms, we will be able to discern certain patterns, long-term tendencies which emanate from its inner logic. So a historically contingent thing can have inner logic as well, in the sense that it doesn't have to exist, so it doesn't have to manifest itself. But once it manifests itself, then there are certain necessities which are due to many factors, but one of them is the inherent logic of whatever it is, which will delimit its trajectory, even if that trajectory itself is contingent and might manifest itself in different form. So that's what I wanted to say. So where were we? So a capitalist society, or a society that is inhabited by a capitalist economy, is one that has on a current basis to work out how its economic social relations, its specific relations of production and exchange are to connect to and interact with a non-economic social relation. This is so in particular because, as suggested, the former happen to have an inherent tendency to expand into and become dominant relative to social context. For this reason, a long capital must be studied as not as